Hello and welcome back to the WMTG Podcast. I am Allie Winall.
And I'm Steve Winall.
And today we are going to be talking about Magic cards that are so good they should never have been printed.
And not just cards, but mechanics.
Yes, mechanics as well.
Basically, we're talking about all the things that the game has gotten wrong over the years, in our humble opinion.
Yeah. Some of these are just going to be biased. Some of these are going to be general opinions that we found on the internet.
Yeah, and we looked up a lot of stuff to begin with. We compiled a list, and we researched it by looking at what other people thought about this category, and we discovered that we agreed on some of them and we disagreed on some of them, so we came up with our own list.
Some of these are also cards or mechanics that we have experienced in our own right.
Yes, and are kind of sick of.
Such as tonight.
Yes. Oh. On that note, would you like to start us off? I have a feeling I know which one you would like to talk about.
Well, should we just go in the order of the list we made, or?
Well, maybe.
I think that would be easier to go by.
Okay, sure.
All right. So the first card we have on this list is Necropotence.
Yeah.
And this is because of the Dark Summer.
Yes, the Black Summer of 96.
Which Dad remembers, I do not.
Yes, my colleague here does not remember it. She was not alive for another 5 years.
Nope. AKA daughter.
Yeah, but this, yeah, I was there. I was alive and well for that.
I don't like using the card, not just because it has a lot of text, but also because I kind of feel like I'd be maybe hated off.
Well, I mean, that could be possible, yeah.
It's
well,
possible,
I mean, our only real experience with it now is in Commander, because
that's
there's
pretty much all we play.
Well, but also there's only two sets that Necropotence, or two formats that Necropotence is even legal in. One of them being Commander, the other Vintage. And it's restricted in Vintage. But of course, since you can only have one of any card in Commander, it's effectively restricted in that as well. So when it's restricted, I think it's fine.
Yeah. If there's 4 of it in a deck, that's when it can be a little problematic.
Well, and of course, you only need one in play in order for it to be bad. Having multiples in play is pointless.
Yeah.
But having 4 in a deck and a 60-card deck back in the day was like, it increases your chances of getting it. And, there was another card, Demonic Consultation, that was just as bad. It was sort of a one-shot. Demonic Consultation basically said you name a card, and then you exile the top, I think, 5 cards of your library. And
you play them?
And no, they're just gone.
Okay.
You exile them. So if the card you named was in there, you're just screwed. But then you continue to exile cards after that until
you get to it?
Until you hit the named card, and then that one goes into your hand. So it was sort of a weird go through your whole deck tutor type of thing. But, back in the day, you could have 4 Necropotences and 4 Demonic Consultation. Turn 1, you play a Demonic Consultation named Necropotence. You get one of the Necropotences. Turn 2, you Dark Ritual, play Necropotence, and then suddenly you're drawing your whole deck. Yeah, it was ridiculous. Yeah, Necropotence broke the game for a long time.
And they kept making new versions of it.
Well, it was so bad because everybody was either playing Necropotence or playing to beat Necropotence. And I remember a lot of different archetypes were spawned to try and get rid of, prison decks were created to try and counter Necropotence. Turbo Stasis was a thing.
Yeah, you told me about those.
Yeah, but then, finally, after a year and a half, 2 years of Necropotence just dominating Type 2.
Which is now called Standard.
It finally rotated out of the format.
And then they made a new version of it.
No, then they reprinted it. They reprinted it in 5th edition and it came out again. And it wasn't quite as bad because things like Demonic Consultation were gone. And, I think Dark Ritual might have been gone at that point. A lot of the cards that supported it were gone. But they still had it in, and it's why would you reprint this card after it was so...
Didn't you see what happened to the metagame?
Yeah. And then finally, it rotated out of Standard again, and then they created Yawgmoth's Bargain.
Which is the next card on the list.
One on the list. Yeah, now the Yawgmoth's Bargain, a lot of people, well, that's not broken because it costs twice as much. Yeah, it cost 6 to bring in, but in a way, it was worse because... while it costs 6 to cast, twice as much as Necropotent, Necropotent specifically said you can pay life and set the cards aside. They wouldn't go into your hand until the end of the turn. You'd basically have to wait a whole turn before you could use them. Yawgmoth's Bargain simply said, pay a life, draw a card. You did have to skip your draw step, but when you can just put all the cards directly into your hand and just use them immediately, that's arguably far worse than Necropotence. Far worse. And I remember that card came out and suddenly that's all anybody was playing. It's like they finally got rid of Necropotence for good, printed basically a different version of it, and people just started playing that, and it dominated
and
the format.
another Black Summer came.
Yeah, basically. It was rough, and it should never have been done.
All right,
so. On the heels of that, Yawgmoth's Will was also around this. It was in the same block. Yawgmoth's Bargain and Yawgmoth's Will were both in the Urza's block. One of them was Urza's Saga, the other was Urza's Destiny. But Yawgmoth's Will, it's just a 3 casting cost card that allows you to replay all the cards from your graveyard.
Yep.
It says till end of turn, you may play cards in your graveyard as though they were in your hand. And anything that goes into your graveyard gets exiled that turn, but it doesn't matter because this is something that people would just load up on mana rocks and, instants that would give you mana like Dark Ritual or, something like that. And, you just reuse everything, and it's still used in a whole bunch of combo decks. It's, again, like Necropotence, or Yawgmoth's Bargain, it's only legal in Vintage or Commander, so you can only have one, but it's gross. Probably never should have been created.
At the same time, this card was in the deck that the guy who blew us out of the tournament
yeah, well, okay, to put this in context.
With the next card.
One of the reasons we're so salty right now is the fact that we played against this guy in a Commander tournament tonight, and this guy plays the same deck every single week. This guy's playing a deck that is designed to win on turn 3. Really no later than turn 4 or 5 if he doesn't get hated off the table. But, it basically plays out the same way every single time. And it completely goes against the
everything Commander stands for.
I understand. You're never going to be able to, the only way to make Commander fair, really, or the game of Magic is to say, infinite combos are banned. But how are you going to enforce that? There's no way. There's absolutely no way to really police something like, especially considering there's infinite combos out there that I'm sure people don't even know about. Mm-hmm. I've played decks where I didn't realize I had an infinite combo in it until I discovered it while playing.
Yeah, like Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood.
Well, a lot of people are aware of that little
we
interaction.
Just discovered that on our own, like, oh, this is a thing.
Well, there was another one where I was playing a very artifact-heavy deck, and I had, Future Sight in it. Your top card is face up on your library, and you can play it as though it were in your hand. And I also happened to be playing Sensei's Divining Top and something that lowered the cost of all my artifacts. And that basically means, well, if I can play my Sensei's Divining Top for free, and I can put it on top of my library to draw a card, but then I can play cards.
An infinite combo?
It is an infinite combo. Huh. That means I can draw my whole deck for free. Because, I can play the card for free off the top of my library. Yeah, and I didn't even realize that was a combo until suddenly I'm looking at it in the middle of a game going, oh, I can draw my whole deck now. So yeah, there's no way you can enforce that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I think there's certain cards that are just so broken as far as that's concerned. And that includes the next one on our list.
Ad Nauseam.
Yeah.
Which no one seems to have on their broken cards list.
Yeah, and I think it's because after it rotated or it got banned, it's like it didn't see a whole lot of play in anything outside of like Legacy, but it still sees a lot of play in Legacy, and in Commander, it's game over immediately.
That's what the guy was using.
Yeah, and I think in Commander specifically, there shouldn't be any one card that ends the game on its own.
Oh, no.
I think there are a number of cards out there that are basically must counters or must stop at least. And, that I think Ad Nauseam for me is number 1 on that list. I think another one arguably is Show and Tell. Or not Show and Tell, Tooth and Nail But yeah, Tooth and Nail is another one of those cards that, like...
I hate Tooth and Nail.
You gotta stop it immediately because they're gonna win. The game's gonna be over immediately.
But it's not too broken.
Well, it's expensive. It's expensive because you really need to use the entwine cost. And then I think that's like... What's it cost? Like 9 to cast to do the whole thing. But the thing is, the moment it resolves, the game's over. Because they're going to get 2 creatures that are going to wipe out everything and ping everybody in the face.
But by that time, there's probably someone who's playing blue that has a counterspell that they can cast. Maybe.
Well, possibly, yeah. But I mean, there's a number of ways of getting around it. I mean, you can pillage their deck and make sure you get their targets for it.
But ad nauseam.
Torpor Orb can stop things from happening.
Ad nauseam decks you can't get around.
Ad nauseam is the kind of thing where, like, you got to stop the card immediately.
Yeah.
You have to stop the card because they're going to draw their whole deck.
I was playing a deck that was kind of reworked to be able to stop ad nauseam, and I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's... and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit on our list here because it really goes in with one of the mechanics that I think is bad, and that's Storm. Storm, I believe, is a mechanic that never should have been invented. And here's why I feel that goes with ad nauseum. There's a lot of Storm decks that they use ad nauseum to win with. And the usual version right now is the Ether
Flux Reservoir.
Yeah, Ether Flux Reservoir. Yeah, that's the card that...
Pay 50 life, target player loses 50 life.
Right. Yeah, that's like the Storm mechanic, but ad nauseum is typically used in, like, Legacy with Storm spells, like Grape Shot or Tendrils of Agony, something like that. Ad nauseum is how you get to it, because you just play a bunch of 0 and 1 cast cards.
And it sucks.
Well, yeah, and then, it definitely sucks for the people playing because they're watching someone play Solitaire for 10 minutes and then they lose. That's no fun at all, especially in Commander. But yeah, that's a card I think should never have been printed, and the Storm mechanic should never have been printed because it's so hard to stop. And Wizards of the Coast spent many years trying to remedy that, trying to find ways to combat their own mistake. You get cards like Flusterstorm or something that, that counter any number of spells, or things that say players can only play 1 spell per turn. That was specifically created to stop Storm.
Like one of those cards where players can only play 1 spell per turn. Eidolon of Rhetoric.
Rule of Law or something like that.
Eidolon of Rhetoric.
But the problem with those is those are permanents, and, every Storm deck is just prepared to deal with that. They have a removal spell. They'll have a bounce spell that'll take it off the table before they go off. It's just, they're not very effective. Like Sphere of Resistance was another one that makes all spells cost 1 more. That was supposed to... there are cards like that are supposed to really hose Storm, but they just kind of don't. They might slow it down a little.
But it doesn't hose it completely.
Yeah, it doesn't hose it completely. Yeah, and any time you can just play stuff for free...
That's just...
with huge effects and like multiples.
That's not good.
Yeah, and that kind of goes against the purpose of Magic, I think. Sometimes it's okay.
In some circumstances.
Yeah, but I mean, if there's like if it's difficult to make happen, or if it's something that everybody gets the benefit of, like Alurin. I mean, Alurin's another one that's really difficult, but, but at least everybody gets the benefit of that.
Yeah. But don't make it too easily accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, and if someone can just do it on turn 2 or 3, then that's just
broken.
Yeah, that just makes for an unfun experience for everybody.
Alright, so I guess back to the list, we have Cascade.
Yeah, Cascade. And actually these next couple of mechanics, I think, fall into that same idea of being able to cast stuff for free, and Cascade is like that. Yeah,
Cascade, in the tournament we were playing in, someone in the first pod was playing Maelstrom Wanderer, which has Cascade.
Yeah, very popular commander.
And I was afraid to use Path to Exile on it because he had enough mana to just bring it back out and Cascade twice again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is a thing. It's the kind of card that's big enough.
7/5, too.
It's a big enough threat that you don't want to get hit with it. You don't want it on the table, but at the same time, you're afraid to get rid of it because you don't want that double trigger again.
And it's a legendary creature, so it can be a commander.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, and even before, Cascade's mostly seen in Commander right now, but it's still a thing in Modern. It's still a thing in Legacy.
I've seen Cascade in both.
Living End decks are very much a thing. That's
another card we may have needed to put on the list.
But the reason that's good is specifically because of Cascade.
Yeah.
That archetype in Modern is one where every creature in there has like an enter the battlefield trigger, or it has Cascade. It's the kind of thing where it's just going to bring stuff in constantly. And, there was
But at the same time, you don't want Living End in your hand because you'll never be able to use it.
Yeah, there was Bloodbraid Elf, which had to get banned.
What did it do?
All right. Bloodbraid Elf says haste, Cascade. That's it.
3/2.
Yeah, but I mean, it's when you have a 4-cost card, 3/2 haste with Cascade, but everything else in your deck costs less than 4, then it's always going to hit something. Cascade was just too strong. It was too strong a mechanic.
I don't think anyone likes playing against it.
No, not so much. Now, I've seen some argument about, people thinking it's not that broken unless you have these specific combinations.
And I can see where they're going with that, but at the same time,
I don't think it's the worst of the mechanics out there as far as that's concerned. It's definitely not. But it gets around casting costs.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, and again, playing stuff for free, especially when all you have to do is, Maelstrom Wanderer, double Cascade, that's... And
Maelstrom Wanderer casts for a lot.
Yeah, it does, and that's the thing that keeps it balanced. But at the same time, you also know that double Cascade could win you the game.
It definitely
Because you're playing 2 spells for free after that. And that's rough. And along those lines... Let me talk about Affinity.
Oh, man.
Now, a lot of people will make the argument that Affinity wasn't what made... The mechanic itself wasn't what made it so bad. They'll argue that it was the support cards that made it bad. Like, for example, you'll remember... Well, you might not remember, but way back in the day...
Artifact lands?
Yeah, those got banned.
I have a couple of those, because you gave them to me when I first started.
Yeah, back in the day, they realized Affinity was becoming a problem... So they banned a bunch of cards, but there was not a single card with Affinity that actually got banned. It was the support cards. It was the colored artifact lands. It was things that got you advantage off of it or allowed you to do direct damage off of it, because they wanted to keep the Affinity mechanic. But even without that, let me just point out how this would work. Okay, the 2 main cards. The 2 common cards with Affinity that everybody used were Frogmite and Mirror Enforcer. And they seemed like they were overpriced. One was a 4/4 for 7, the other one was a 2/2 for 4. Those are not deals in Magic. But because they had Affinity for artifacts, that meant you can get them down crazy fast. Just crazy fast.
Yeah.
And to put it in perspective, the original Affinity decks were not considered combo decks. A combo deck was where you assembled... 2 or 3 cards that interacted with each other and then suddenly win all on one turn. But Affinity didn't do that. It won with an attack. But imagine, turn 1, you play an artifact land and then you tap it and you put in some other 1 casting cost
and
artifact.
Say like a Chrome Mox or a Mox Opal or something like that.
And you drop another artifact, another 0 cost artifact. And then, then you get to spend 1 with that land that you just dropped and play a Frogmite. Now you've got 4 artifacts in play, which means you get to play the second Frogmite for free. Then turn 2, you drop another artifact land.
Mirror Enforcer.
And you pay 1, you drop in a Mirror Enforcer for 4, and then your second Mirror Enforcer is free. And then you attack with the first Frogmite for 2. Now they're at 18, right?
I can see where this is going.
Then on turn 3, you drop something like Cranial Plating, which is an equipment card that says, give +1 power to a creature where, for every artifact you control. And suddenly they're dead.
Yep.
You equip one of your creatures
That's
and
game.
They're taking 20 to the face on turn 3. And that was just from attacking and playing creatures for free. So that's not a combo. And
it's just the ability.
It's just the ability was too good. It was too fast. And I remember originally people weren't exactly sure how to play it. It took them a couple months to really sort of figure it out. But once it hit its stride, I remember the state championships came out that year.
Ooh.
And now this is just when they changed it to the state and island and provincial and the territorial championships. So there would be one champion for the state of Maryland where we are, and one for the state of California, and one for New York, but there'd also be one for
Guam.
Yeah, and Samoa, the Virgin Islands, whatever.
Puerto Rico.
Yeah, right. So after that weekend, all the places reported, and they put out a list online, this enormous list of about 100 decks.
They were all affinity.
90% of the winning decks from all of those championships were affinity decks, and they were decks with almost identical builds. And that, to me, is a huge mistake in the game. Enormous.
It kind of brings you back to the whole dark summer. The Black Summer with everyone playing the same Necropotence deck.
Yeah, it did. And actually that's gonna take me off on another tangent of a card that's actually not on our list. Mm-hmm. But just for the sake of having the same thing, this would be Psychotog.
Oh.
Now, Psychotog.
Yeah, we should have put that on.
Yeah, well, we can talk about it right now. I mean, Psychotog by itself, again, was not necessarily a broken card, but it was too easy to abuse. And a lot of people felt that the reason it was bad was because of the card Sunder, which...
Remind me what the two cards do again.
Okay, now, of course, it was, they decided to make Atog, the card Atog, a type, a tribal type. And Psychotog was the demure version of it. Psychotog saying, discard a card from your hand, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Remove 2 cards in your graveyard from the game, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Now, when every single card in your hand and graveyard is a resource for making a single card bigger, all you gotta do is get a whole bunch of cards into your hand. Because then you discard those cards, now they're in your graveyard, you can use them again to pump up the same creature. So Sunder, the reason people figured Sunder was the problem was it sent all lands back to people's hands.
Ooh.
So basically what you would do is you would get up to 9 mana, you would float all 9, you'd spend 6 of it to send all the lands back to your hand. You'd use the floating 3 to play the Psychotog. And then you could pitch all of the cards in your hand. Yeah, including an Anger, which would give you haste. You replay a mountain, so you would have haste. And then you'd pitch all the cards in your hand to make him bigger. Then you pitch all the cards out of your graveyard.
And make him even bigger. And he's lethal damage.
Yeah, swing and win. Yeah, and so that's a mechanic that's not really a mechanic.
God. Imagine that with ad nauseum.
Well, yeah, but I mean, and again, I think the reason that doesn't necessarily make my list is that that really did depend on the support cards. Mm-hmm. But to give you an idea of how narrow the strategies were at that time in the game, they didn't do enough to really curb that deck. And it dominated the entire time it was in Standard. The World Championships, the year that card came out, they released the top 8 deck lists afterwards because I didn't watch it live or anything, but I looked at the top 8 deck lists afterwards. The 8 top people in the World Championships that year, there were 2 people playing Squirrel Prison, basically Squirrel's Nest in opposition, so you crank out a bunch of squirrel tokens and then lock people down by tapping all their lands with your squirrels. There were 2 people playing that. The remaining 6 players were all playing identical Psychotog decks.
Aww.
So the entire metagame of Magic became about how does my Psychotog deck beat your Psychotog deck when we're playing the exact same build.
It's who can do this faster?
Yeah. That to me is not...
That's not Magic.
That's not what the game of Magic is about.
It's not about pulling off this one thing before someone else. It's about creating a new deck for yourself and seeing how it does against other decks.
So I'm not sure if Psychotog really falls into the cards that never should have existed category, but it is definitely a situation that they should have seen coming and headed off of the pass, and they should never have allowed that to happen. And once they realized it was happening, they should have done more to stop it, because it just stagnated the game so badly. So moving on.
We have Madness.
Now, yeah, that was kind of a last inclusion. I included that simply because that dominated the game for a while. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say that, anything that dominates the game is bad and should be banned or never should have happened. No. But I included it simply because it was yet another way to sort of get around casting cost. Mm-hmm. Not as bad as Affinity. In fact, Affinity kind of came right on the heels of Madness. And Madness was dominating so much at the time that people were like, oh, thank God Madness is rotating out. And then Affinity came along and like, oh my God, they made it worse. Ugh. But Madness was like, you have to discard a card and then you get a cheaper cost. And it was really, really good. Not necessarily broken, but enough to dominate the game. I just included it because I felt
getting around casting costs is a little overpowered.
Yeah, alternative casting costs for things are good within reason, and then they become too good and to be considered broken.
Sort of like the Phyrexian mana. That was kind of a trade-off.
Kind of, yeah. And that I don't mind so much.
No. Though some people think it's overpowered.
It can be. I think it can be.
With enough life gain.
Yeah, or in the right deck where you're not so worried about losing life if you're going to win on the next turn. Like Infect decks tend to use it a lot. Because they don't care if, they're going to be spending a bunch of mana because they're going to plan on winning in the first 4 turns, So it's...
Madness isn't as bad as Affinity, but it's still pretty bad.
It's a good ability that may have gone too far in a couple of instances.
And now it's time for the obligatory Power 9 section.
Yeah, and I'm almost loath to talk about that because it kind of goes without saying, I think.
Like, of course you gotta have that on the list.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of cards that I think even beyond the Power 9 from the early days of Magic that shouldn't have been printed. Mm-hmm. They've all hit banned and restricted lists over the years, though. Like Sherazade was one of them. That's the play a game within a game card. Oh. The anti cards also fall into that category. Yeah. But that's back. I give that a pass because that's back in the day before they really figured out what all the game could do, and the rules had not really gelled yet, at least as far as tournament play. And they didn't realize that, a lot of these mechanics just make the game completely unfun for people, so we need to fix that.
And then the Power 9.
Yeah.
Which they're only legal in Vintage, and even then I think they're restricted.
Yes, they are. Every single one of them. You can only play them in Vintage and only one of each.
They're also the most expensive cards in the game.
Yes, and...
in money terms, not mana.
And I know there are a lot of Vintage purists out there who feel like, no, you should be able to play any card that's ever been printed because that's the whole, But, I mean, think about it. It's... how fun could it really be, unless you're one of the people who had all those cards to begin with, or you have thousands and thousands of dollars to spend accumulating Magic cards, and you're the person who's going to try and win on turn 1.
And come on, you just gotta be honest. If you have that much money to spend on a card game, you're in the 1%.
well, at this point, yeah, because I mean, what's Black Lotus up to now? The
most
market?
Expensive one I've seen was $9,999.
Oh, they're far more expensive than that now. Far more expensive than that now.
That was the most expensive one I've seen.
No, they're like...
I know there are more expensive ones,
like
but
30, 40 grand, yeah.
That's the one I saw.
But yeah, I mean, Vintage to me is really about whose turn 1 combo can go off first. And that's
it's like, who gets to go first?
Yeah.
Who gets to win the game?
Coin flip. Well, I guess you win this time. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's just not interesting to me. And obviously it's not always going to go off, but the thing is, if you don't manage to pull it off in the first couple turns, your opponent's probably going to. Unless they're playing a deck that's specifically designed to shut that strategy down, and even then it becomes just about one person playing.
Yep.
That's not interesting to me.
That's not fun. And I'm the kind of person who likes to play fair.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I want it to be fun for everyone.
Well, I think everybody likes to well, some people don't, but I think most people like to play fair, but they're also going to do whatever they can within the construct of the rules in order to win.
Of course.
And that's why we have cards or mechanics that should not have existed.
Mm-hmm.
And moving on,
We have 3 cards from the same set or block.
Yeah, and I think they could all be talked about separately, but I included them all in one thing because they all came out at one time, and they were all banned from Standard or Type 2 within a month of them coming out.
Pretty much immediately.
It was like immediately Wizards of the Coast realizing, oh, we made a big mistake here.
These 3 cards are Time Spiral, Tolarian Academy, and Windfall.
Yeah. Now, Time Spiral and Windfall, I think, after they rotated out, they both got restricted in Vintage, and I think they're both banned in Legacy. They kind of became not as bad. Like, I've seen them both used in Commander, for example, and I don't think they're as broken in that format.
No, because
I think when they're restricted, they're fine. But they still shouldn't. I mean, they're way too overpowered. Way too overpowered, because one of them is a storm spell.
Ugh.
Time Spiral basically is you shuffle your deck, you reveal a card, you can play it for free.
Yep.
But then it has Storm.
Which is another mechanic that shouldn't have been made.
Yeah, so basically, if you've played a whole bunch of cards and then you play Time Spiral, you're just getting like 6, 7, 8 free cards. And then if one of those cards is another Storm spell, then it just gets ridiculous. Yeah, then you win immediately.
Then it's just, the other player's just gonna get mad at you.
Yeah, and Windfall was another one that sort of facilitated that. It's like everybody discards their hand and then they draw cards equal to the highest number of cards that were discarded.
It was pretty much a different version of Time Twister from the Power 9.
Yeah, slightly. Like, Time Twister made everybody shuffle hands and graveyards and decks all together and then draw 7 cards. Windfall just affected hands. But it's the kind of thing where think, oh, well, it's balanced because everybody's getting it. But no, that's not how it works, because you're making everybody discard the cards that they decided to keep.
Yep.
And you've probably already emptied your hand, but you play Windfall, and now you get to refill your hand with a bunch of... Yeah,
and you get to play more stuff.
Yeah, too abusive. And Tolarian Academy is just, come on. What were they thinking?
Gain a blue for
every artifact in
you
play.
Control.
What
or
were
not
they
in control.
thinking? What were they thinking?
I thought it was you control and play. Ugh.
Yeah, well, not. It's that you control.
Yeah.
But, that's so gross.
That
in a
gets
game,
put into every affinity deck.
In a game that's already got mana rocks everywhere, that's a card that's just like, and
why?
And some of those things are going to untap your lands.
Why would you even do that?
Yeah, that at the time led to a lot of turn 3 kills, and they immediately realized, bad mistake. And then they've tried over the years to like look at it again and say, well, maybe it's not so bad anymore. We should do it. Nope. Still bad. It's always going to be bad.
Yep.
It's never should have been created.
They considered it to be redone, and they're like, nah, let's just stay away from that.
And by extension, you could also say like Gaia's Cradle or Sarah's Sanctum, which does it for creatures and enchantments respectively, but they're not as bad.
They're not as bad.
Gaia's Cradle still incredibly good, but creatures can be killed, and that a lot easier than artifacts can, or enchantments.
Yeah, because creatures can be killed in combat, they can be killed with direct damage, they can just be destroyed by a target spell, they can be exiled, they can be given negative counters, they can be sacrificed.
One board wipe and that Gaia's Cradle will give you nothing.
Yep.
Harder to do that with artifacts, especially considering that a lot of artifacts can be like mana generators in and of themselves. Yeah, should not have been created.
No. Now we have Tinker.
Also from that same block. They made a lot of mistakes.
Sacrifice an artifact. Get another one.
Yeah, go into your library, put any artifact directly into play. That was the thing that made it so bad.
Absolutely any artifact. Wormcoil Engine.
Yeah. Oh, there's this bigger and worse. It's
bigger and worse.
Yeah, like Blightsteel Colossus.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
Well, just put 11/11 Infect Trample. Yeah, come on.
Why would you even make an Infect Trample 11/11 with Tinker?
Yeah, Tinker too overpowered.
Or anything that could just fetch up an artifact.
Yeah, and actually, we're still on the same block, along the same vein. Show and Tell.
Mm-hmm.
Same deal. That's both players can play a creature or a permanent out of their hand. Actually, is it creature or permanent? I think
it's permanent.
It's permanent. Yeah.
It's permanent. It's like, it lists every kind of permanent except for Planeswalker, because that was before Planeswalkers.
Right.
Way before Planeswalkers. So if you did manage to play it in, like, a casual game nowadays. You wouldn't be able to get a Planeswalker out of it. But it's still an extremely good card because 2 generic, 1 blue, sorcery. Each player may choose an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land card in his or her hand and put that permanent into play.
Yeah, and in Legacy right now, that means, turn 1, 2, or 3, I'm putting Emrakul into play.
Yep.
You know, that's just ridiculous. Or it can also be used for something like Omniscience. So
that makes me sad.
Yeah, you put a blue enchantment into play that says now you just get to play stuff for free. You know,
it's like a constant show and tell.
Yeah, almost. And then from that point on, you have show and tell effect available to you, but you do
not
and
to
your
anyone
opponent
else.
doesn't. Yeah, and
you get to keep it for yourself.
And here's the thing: you almost never care about what the other person's putting into play because your deck is built around it, and theirs probably isn't. So I mean, it's like, what can they put in that's going to be worse?
Big creature that can do it or whatever.
Now I did manage to do something really funny once in a Legacy deck with that. Oh yeah, it was hilarious. It was so hilarious. It was like, oh god, they played show and tell and dropped Emrakul in, and the card I put in was something like, it just completely negated. It was like humility or something like that. It just stopped them immediately. It's like,
that person must have been so sad.
Nice 1/1 creature you just put in for free there with no abilities. Yeah.
Let me just shock that.
Yeah, so there are ways that it could backfire, but usually it doesn't. And again, that's like casting something really big for really, really cheap. Along those lines, the card Flash, we didn't include that.
But there was a card called Flash?
There was a card called Flash. This is before the Flash mechanic became a thing.
Flash MTG.
Yes. The card Flash, just 2 to cast, and it says put a creature card from your hand into play. You may pay its mana cost reduced by up to 2 if you don't sacrifice it.
And it's an instant.
Yeah.
Of course.
And people originally looked at it and they thought, well, that's just dumb. You could play the cost up to 2, but it costs 2 to play Flash, so the only reason you would do that is if you don't have the mana to do. But then people started realizing, oh, there's ways to abuse that. You can kind of stifle the effect of that, or you can abuse an ETB trigger. You know, you can do a lot of things with it. And then, you know, they invented the card Protean Hulk, and you know, things that could really just abuse it, and it was like suddenly, I don't even care.
Protean Hulk on its own is hard to deal with.
Yeah, but when you can flash it in on turn 2.
I don't want to have to think about that.
Yeah, so that's probably another version that should not have been great. Yeah, show and tell Protean Hulk, flash in Protean Hulk. Yeah. Or, you know, there's other things that could abuse it when they leave the battlefield. It's like, I mean, you flash in a Revelark. You know, when it leaves the battlefield, you get more stuff out of your graveyard. That goes into play. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to abuse stuff like that.
All right, and next we have a card that a lot of people complain about, but we don't, and that's Skull Clamp. Yeah,
well, I think the reason we don't complain about it so much is that we have the benefit of only playing it in, like, Commander.
Or Highlander formats.
Yeah, but it's banned in everything else. It's restricted in Vintage and it's banned in everything else.
So you can only really play it in Commander.
Yeah, to me, it kind of falls in the same category as like Necropotence, which is not so bad now because it's restricted.
It's better in a Highlander format because it's not as broken.
Exactly, but at the time,
Skull Clamp is kind of the same way.
Skull Clamp was one of those cards that was almost immediately banned in Standard upon it coming out because I don't know why they thought it would be okay to simply say, oh, you know, pay 1 mana, draw 2 cards when you sacrifice a creature effectively, you know, but I mean, I don't know why they thought, and it can go in any deck.
Yep, because it's an artifact.
Because it's an artifact. I don't know.
And it's colorless.
To me, that falls under the category of how did that card ever get greenlit? How did R&D, how was there no one in all of research and development that no one said anything to them as like, have you thought about how stupid that's going to be? You know,
it's the same kind of thing with cards like Necropotence or Yawgmoth's Bargains. Like, why would you greenlight that?
Well, Yawgmoth's Bargain, yes, because they should have known at that point. Because Necropotence told them everything they needed to know. Necropotence, I think they just didn't think about. They didn't think it was going to get abused the way that it did. Because at the time, it was like, this card does a lot.
Or maybe ad nauseum.
Yeah, well,
how did that one get greenlit?
They have this idea in their head that, well, paying life means that's going to balance it. When people are like, no, if you're allowing me to pay life as a resource, that's especially to draw cards.
Especially if you have a whole bunch of a life link or an infinite life combo.
I can always gain more life, or just simply win before my low life becomes a problem. You know, that's, you know.
Better hope no one has a lightning bolt.
Yeah, right. But I mean, and that was a thing. That was one of the ways to counter necropotence back in the days if they got low enough. But at the same time, the savvy necropotence player would always know
how to get around that.
Not to overextend. Or just simply how to win before it became an issue.
On here. I'm going to gain some life first.
But Skullclamp definitely fell into that category of you had to have known.
Attach it to a 1/1 token or something that has a leave the battlefield effect.
Yeah, you had to have known.
And you draw 2 cards and maybe get a leaving the battlefield effect off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just
Why?
It makes me think that it's like every now and then R&D is like, do they not actually play the game before they greenlight these things? Because,
or are they just completely casual players?
Yeah, and it's like, because anybody who knows a little bit about what they're doing in this game would have to know how that's going to get abused. And they're going to have to retcon it later.
Yeah. Alright, next we have another mechanic that people seem to complain about, but again, we don't really complain about, and that's Miracle.
Well, I think it's because we don't have much experience with it. No. We don't play Legacy specifically. Miracle is very big in Legacy. Like Entreat the Angels, you know.
Yeah. Basically, what Miracle does, if you top decked the card, or if it's the first card that you play if you draw that card the first time that turn, you get to play it for a single mana.
Yeah, if it's the first card you draw on the turn, you get to play it for the reduced mana cost.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part that people don't, not necessarily the fact that it's cheaper, but it rewards top decking.
Yeah, we saw something online where someone made a comment that Miracle kind of made Magic a bit like Texas Hold'em.
Yeah, it is kind of like hitting a 2-outer on the river in Texas Hold'em is how they described it. And I can kind of see that because, now I don't necessarily have a problem with it because
there aren't very many Miracle cards out there.
There's not. There are not a whole lot of them out there. Some of them are better than others. I think if your deck is really set up to abuse it, that's a different story. That's why it's such a powerhouse in Legacy, and it's very ubiquitous in Legacy. You see those decks all over the place. And I can see where it's a problem not playing a whole lot of Legacy or against those decks very often. I don't have that experience with it.
But again, in Highlander formats, it's not going to be as much of a problem.
Yeah.
And that's what we have the most experience with.
It can still be bad. And in fact, I abused it tonight at the Commander tournament that we were in. We were in we were in a situation where we had an Edgar Markov deck playing. So he was just loading up on vampires. Vampires all over the table, and he was just beating the crap out of everything. And he had
you pulled like a Terminus or something?
Yeah. Well, I specifically I cast a Limdal's Vault at the end of his turn, and I stacked it so that, you know, I found a group of 5 and that I really liked, and Terminus was in there. I put Terminus right on the top, and so I specifically maneuvered it to the top of my library so that I could wipe out all the creatures in play.
For a single white mana.
And that was a really clutch play at the time. Actually, it completely changed the game because this guy was just going to roll over everybody.
My clutch play was fetching Rest in Peace with Zur the Enchanter while having a Helm of Obedience in my hand.
It's pretty good.
When I was about to die to that same double cascade.
Yeah. So while I can see that it does reward top decking, I think when you set it up so that you're manipulating it to the top of your deck, it's not necessarily top decking, it's playing its strategy.
I think I know why it's called Miracle. Because it's a miracle that you drew the card.
Yeah, and that you get to play it right then and there. It's like, yeah, sure.
Alright, next on the list we have Stoneforge Mystic.
Yeah.
It's a really good card that you picked up not too long ago.
Yeah, I picked up one. Yeah, that kind of came out during a hiatus from the game that I had, so unfortunately I wasn't able to get a playset of them before they became super expensive. But I can see the power of this card for sure, and it's banned in Modern for good reason, because it's the kind of deck that if it was in Modern, that's all anybody would play, I think. It would be one of those things where it's like, okay, well, how's my Stoneforge Mystic deck going to beat your Stoneforge Mystic deck?
Basically, kind of like, how is my Psychotog deck going to beat your Psychotog deck?
And that's something that Wizards, to their credit, does try to avoid these days. It's still all over Legacy. Because it's a value. It's a value card. It's not necessarily an over-the-top broken card, but it's a super value engine. For just 2 mana, it's a tutor for an equipment card the moment it comes into play. And then for another 2 mana, you can just put an equipment card directly into play.
So you could get one of the swords.
Yeah.
You could get Skull Clamp.
Batterskull.
Yep.
Umezawa's GD. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of great things.
Batterskull was the living weapon.
Yeah, that's the usual target for it. That's
a living
the big,
weapon.
Yeah, and, it's a very, very, very strong card.
Equip a germ.
Yeah, and again, in something where you're talking a restricted format, Highlander.
It's not going to be quite as bad.
It's still really good.
But it's not going to be quite as abusive.
Not necessarily, unless you're really set up for it. If you have something to abuse ETB triggers and you have a lot of equipment, like if you're running something that can blink creatures and you're also running a Voltron strategy or something, then Stoneforge Mystic can get really, really ugly in that format, but it's still a little more balanced. I can see why, a lot of people mention this in cards that they think never should have existed. It's on a lot of people's list because I guess they just got tired of losing to it, or they just got tired of seeing it. Anything that makes the game stagnate is something
I can understand that because it makes the game boring and it just kind of turns you away from it. Yeah. Leaves a foul taste in your mouth.
Yeah.
Alright, next we have a card that was infamous.
Yes.
The infamous Planeswalker, Jace the Mind Sculptor.
The Planeswalker, yeah.
Yep.
And again, this was during a time where I just missed it, much to my chagrin, or my regret, actually. Because
you can never get one now.
Yeah, they're so expensive. And interestingly enough, I think that's the thing that's balancing it right now. But the thing that's really balancing it right now is that it's so prohibitively expensive. I can see this is during a time when Planeswalkers were still a very new thing that they were trying to figure out.
You were still kind of skeptical about them.
Yeah, well, I definitely was to begin with, because when I got back into the game, Planeswalkers had been around for a little while.
So they were a little more balanced.
Well, yeah, but I also wasn't really sure of how to use them, It was, I sort of had to retrain my brain magic-wise to deal with the existence of Planeswalkers. But Jace the Mind Sculptor was like, well, we don't have a whole lot of Planeswalkers in the game.
Let's make a new one.
Yeah, and then they really didn't think that one out.
It's basically a bunch of different really good spells packed into one card, and you can do it all for free.
It's got more abilities than the typical Planeswalker has.
It has 4 instead of 3.
Yeah, and they're all really good.
They're all incredible. Yeah. The ultimate is -12, though. Good luck getting that off.
Well, but I mean, free brainstorm every turn. That if that's all it did, that would be a broken card, Really, really good card. And while that's not a card I ever anticipate playing, sadly, unless I do it like a proxy tournament or something, and while I only rarely ever see it sitting across the table from me, I can totally get why that's a card most people think never should have been created. And yeah, I totally get it.
Alright, next we have poison counters.
Yeah, just the whole idea of poison. Now, this is a really early mechanic.
Started off with just poisonous.
Yeah, and it was just was it Marsh Viper, I think, was the card that did it, and there was maybe a couple others.
There was a poisonous sliver.
Yeah. Well, originally it was meant to just be something that was specific to a card or two, but then they decided, well, since we've created this additional way to win the game,
why not add it to a few other creatures?
Why not make that a thing? Why not make that a mechanic? Because right now people are trying to play it and it's not really working. And for the longest time, it wasn't a viable strategy, really, until they invented Infect. And
Infect made it so much better.
Suddenly it became... And that's I think what really took it over the top of they shouldn't have done that.
And I think at the same time they introduced Proliferate. Around that time.
Yeah, but I think Infect in and of itself is not a bad ability, and Poison in and of itself is not a bad ability, but there's a disparity. Especially in Commander,
Oh,
when you consider you're starting with 40 life, but it still only takes 10 poison to kill you. That's, and in Modern, it's a big deal too, because people can turn off turn 2, 3 wins. Yeah.
There are a lot of cards with Infect out there.
Well, but they're cheap. It's a really cheap strategy to put together. And when you have so many cheap buff spells that you can throw on a single creature with Infect, you can kill someone so fast.
And then there's Blight Steel Colossus or whatever it is.
Yeah, which will do it with a single hit.
And it has Trample.
Yeah.
So even if some of the damage is blocked, you're still going to be taking a lot.
Yeah, and even if you're, like, in a duel and you both have 20 life, knowing that you're not doing damage to them at all, that you're trying to get poison counters, and every creature in your deck has poison, or infect, or poisonous. Or whatever, it's basically like saying, I'm starting the game with 20 life and you're starting with 10. You're starting with half the life I do.
Yep. It's basically an emblem that says, at the beginning of the game, your opponent starts with half the life total.
Yeah, it's effectively like that, and that's a bit broken.
Yeah.
Now I get the point of it, is that it's supposed to be, a different way to win, and
there have been multiple ways to win.
If it took 20 poison counters to kill somebody, then what's the point of poison? Because you may as well just damage them. But so I understand that, but
in Commander, why not double it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it made more sense when it was harder to poison people too. Because then it was like just an additional way to win.
Also in Commander, if it took 20 poison counters, that would be pretty close to Commander damage.
Yeah.
So I can understand why they didn't do that as well.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's your commander that's infecting, sure, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But yeah, so
I wouldn't see that.
It kind of convoluted the game a little bit. It was meant originally just as a cute little thing that they did on a couple of cards.
I remember when I first started playing Magic, I saw Infect from a previous set, and I looked at it and was like, okay, that's a pretty cool ability, but even at such an early state of playing the game, I could see how that could be abused. Because there are probably a bunch of creatures with Infect, and if it only takes 10 poison counters to kill someone and you start at 20 life, then how quick is that going to be? That's going to be pretty quick.
I'm not sure it really falls into the category of never should have existed, but it does fall into the category of they need to relook at it and revamp the rules to it somehow. I don't know what the answer to that is.
Maybe make it 15.
Yeah, maybe it depends. Well, in Commander, sure.
But
it's really abusive in Modern, too.
Or you can make it so that you can remove poison counters, too. If you bring back Infect or Poisonous, why not make a mechanic that can also get rid of poison counters?
Well, there were ways to do that in the past.
Really?
There have been cards that could get rid of poison counters, but the problem is it wasn't a common enough strategy to really warrant the use of those cards. Having the cards that were an answer to it was a really narrow strategy in decks that are, deck lists tend to be tight. Especially in competitive formats. You really gonna allow a room for something to get rid of poison counters when you might only see one deck? It's really.
You could make it like a sideboard card.
Yeah, maybe, but it's like that's still really not going to answer the problem.
Why not make a card that can remove counters off of something, any kind of counter?
But here you would have to do it at instant speed.
Yeah,
you would have to be able to do it as a fast effect or prevent it from happening in the first place, because most Infect decks are not going to accumulate poison counters on you. They're going to deliver 10 right to your face immediately, all in one go. And so that makes countering it very hard.
Fog.
Sure, Fog. Why not?
Just the card Fog.
It's something they need to look at. Yeah. Moving on.
All right. Next we have just a complaint of mine from when we played Modern. I used to play, well, just a little bit of backstory first. I used to play a mill deck, a blue-black mill deck.
Which I loved.
Yeah. It was good, but at the same time, I wasn't very good at playing the game.
Well, it's not the most competitive strategy. No. It's not the easiest strategy by any stretch to pull off in Modern, but it's a whole lot of fun, and when it works, it really, really works.
But I kept on ending up in since they were Swiss tournaments, I ended up on the lower end of the scale for pairings. And I always seemed to go up against this guy who played Leyline of Sanctity, which makes you untargetable. It gives you hexproof. And if you get it in your starting hand, you start the game with the card on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
Which completely shut me down.
Right.
And I didn't have a way to get rid of it.
Yeah. Now, I don't have a problem with that card at all. I actually love the card.
It's a good card.
So this is where we're going to diverge, but I can understand where if you're playing sort of a narrow strategy, like a burn deck, for example, Leyline of Sanctity is going to be a big problem for you. It's going
burn and mill. Those are...
It's going to
Leyline of Sanctity is...
Well, anything that relies on targeting your opponent, that's just the end of it,
Leyline of Sanctity, there's like an orb card that does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like...
I was introduced. Orb.
Yeah, Witchbane Orb.
Yeah.
That card was introduced to me at the same time as Torpor Orb, which does a completely different thing, but those two cards, when you're playing a deck that relies on targeting your opponent specifically, it kind of shuts you down right off the bat.
If you don't have any answers for it.
And it can still be pretty hard to get to those answers.
But still, I think the thing that balances Leyline of Sanctity, though, is that it's really still a sideboard card.
Yeah.
A lot of times, there's a lot of strategies that's just going to be a dead card against. It's really nice if you see it in your opening hand, you can just drop it immediately in, and there's a lot of things they can't do to you. But at the same time, it's going to sit just sort of dead a lot of the time.
Yeah.
In a lot of strategies.
Yeah. But I'm just putting Leyline of Sanctity on the list because of my experiences with it.
Okay, no, that's fair.
Alright, next is something that you put on.
Yeah, well, the next three are all...
the last three.
Yeah, they're expensive creatures, but...
you do not like them.
Well, I do and I don't.
Yeah.
It depends.
You like playing them, you don't like going up against them.
Yeah, sure. That's fair.
Mm-hmm. First one of these is Iona, Shield of Emeria.
Yeah, and actually that's something that... even though it's a really high mana cost, it's the kind of thing, the reason I don't like it is that it sort of breaks the game in a single card. If you're up against, now you could argue, just like Leyline of Sanctity, it's only good if, your opponent's got a narrow strategy. But it says they can't, name a color when it comes in, and your opponents can't play cards of that color. If they're in a single color strategy...
If they're playing monocolor, they will never play another card again.
You've just shut them out of their entire deck by playing a single card.
Anything but watch you beat them to death.
Yeah, and to me, even though that's a really expensive card to get down, that is too much power for a single card. If you can shut your opponent out of an entire color with a single card...
That warrants a banhammer.
Yeah. Or it means you can't play a monocolored deck knowing that thing is out there and,
If your opponent's playing white, be careful, monocolored players.
Yeah, it's like the moment they get the 9 mana, you might just lose.
Alright, the next one is Deadeye Navigator.
Yeah, now I have a love-hate relationship with this card.
You play it. You love playing it.
I've got it in a rune deck, but it's really just an infinite combo engine. And that's the reason I both love and hate it, because...
And that's why I don't like going up against your rune deck.
Well, I mean, it's a finisher with a lot of different decks. I've seen it in a lot of different strategies. It's paired a lot with, a lot of things like, Peregrine Drake or Great Whale or, Palancron, stuff that untaps lands.
Even though you're not really going to be using Soul Bond all that much, there are situations where you could use it, but mostly you're going to be using the second ability. Or the first ability, because Soul Bond is second.
Well, but the reason it has Soul Bond, that's why it works.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be used to... Deadeye Navigator is specifically there to abuse Enter the Battlefield triggers.
Yep.
Now, I think originally the idea was, it's to save a creature. It can save a creature and itself by blinking it out. Yeah, I think anybody who has looked, anybody with a competitive edge in Magic is going to look at this card and they're not going to think, hey, I can save my creatures. They're going to think immediately, no, I can abuse the crap out of this. I'm going to double up and triple up on every single Enter the Battlefield trigger. And if that trigger is untap all your lands, then that's infinite mana. And then you can just keep doing it over and over and over and over and over again. And then you can soul bond it to other things. And, basically that's just the end of the game, because depending on what enter the battlefield triggers you have, that means you're going to get all the mana, you're going to destroy all the creatures, you're going to draw all the cards, you're going to hose all the people.
Do all the things.
You're going to do all the things. So that's too abusive. It's 6 to cast and 2 to activate each time, but again, if what you're going for is infinite mana, doesn't matter. The moment you get that combo, you're going off and it's done.
And finally, another card you put on, Sigarda, Host of Herons.
Yeah. Now, I think that's mostly a commander concern. I think it's balanced in everything else.
Yeah.
I really think it's balanced in everything else. In fact, in everything else, it might not even be that good because it's slow. It's too expensive.
In Commander,
it's
a totally different story.
It's a runaway freight train that needs to be dealt with, and it's really hard to deal with.
It's like, hey, Sigarda, come back here.
Yeah, now to put it in perspective, I was in a league, like a commander league, where you started with a pre-con, like commander deck, and then you were gradually allowed to change pieces of it over time. You'd get to change anywhere from 4 to 6 cards a week to alter the deck. And someone wound up building theirs into a Sigarda Voltron deck. And when you don't have to worry about a whole things like really fast infinite combos or impossible to deal with control strategies that, are like stacks decks or anything like that.
You're not going to see stacks in that kind of ruling.
A Voltron deck can do really, really well. And when that Voltron deck includes a creature that you can't touch, you can't destroy because it's indestructible after they get,
shielded by faith,
or something like that on
indestructibility.
it. Yeah, when they'll first thing they'll do is give it indestructibility, and then you've got an untargetable, indestructible card that can't be sacrificed. So that gives you an incredibly narrow list of things that can deal with it.
It can only be dealt with board wipes.
Yeah, well, or in a way that you can just not get hit by it. I mean, you could fog,
Propaganda.
But as far as the cards that'll actually take it off the table, you gotta exile or bounce, and they can't be effects that are targeted. That's really tough to deal with.
Cyclonic Rift Overload.
Yeah, but even then, that's going to be a temporary solution unless you can really, really capitalize on the empty board after the wipe. And that means, and if you're not drawing those cards, you're on a clock, because Sigarda getting bigger is going to just pound you in the face.
Sigarda is not a good time in Commander.
No, not unless you're playing it. Unless you're the one playing it.
In which case you're like, hee, I'm beating you down and you can't do anything about it.
So I'm looking at this entire list, back at the whole thing, and I realize there's not really any bad cards on here. In fact, they're all kind of great, all the mechanics, and that's exactly why they are on this list. We say these are cards or mechanics that shouldn't have existed because
they're too good.
They're too good. Yeah, they make the game unbalanced. They make it unfun. They didn't really think about it before they created them. And this is a game it's a game. Yeah, we get that.
It's supposed to be fun for everyone.
A lot of people get their enjoyment out of being the best they can at it, or doing the most abusive things, or being as competitive as they possibly can, and I got no problem with that. But when the game itself is geared towards making it one-sided, and this is also a game we're talking about where possession is part of the strategy. Like, having the cards to play is a big part of it. And, when the secondary market drives these cards up so expensive that it's hard for a lot of players to get a hold of, a lot of the cards on this list are very expensive cards, or they're hard to get a hold of for other reasons. And, that just kind of breaks the game.
And it makes it not fun for anyone.
Yeah.
And it drives people away from even trying the game at points.
Yeah, and even the guy that we played against tonight in a commander game, he won on, what was that, turn 3?
Turn 4. Because turn 4. I had 4 lands out.
Yeah. I did not see a 4th turn. That's all. I did not see a 4th turn in that game. And all I could think of was, well, that was no fun for anybody but him. And if you think about it, what fun did he really have? He basically played solitaire for 2 minutes and then the game was over. And, it's just... It's like, okay, good on you. That's not a fun game.
So
that's where our list came from.
Just basically came from our salt.
Yeah. This was the salty edition of WMTG. Yeah. Do you agree with our list? I don't care. No, I do. That's not true.
It sucked.
It's not true that I don't care.
Well, suit yourself with a suture priest.
It's a stupid joke.
We laughed about it for 5 minutes at one point.
Anyway, usually we like to come up with lists that are like things that we love about it. And you know, and a lot of these cards are stuff that I do enjoy playing. Mm-hmm. But I think they need to be in the right scenario.
Yep.
You know, like a lot of these, for example, are stuff that once they got restricted or put into a commander or a different format or in a different way, then they were just fine.
Yep.
You know, and
Necropotence. Too broken in Type 2, but perfectly fine in Highlander.
Yeah, sure. Well, in a deck where your whole, you can't have multiples of any given card.
Ad nauseum, not good in anything.
Yeah, ad nauseum should never have been printed. I'll agree with you there.
Yeah. It's just way too good.
Yeah, but, and I don't want to, like, say that, you know, any card that is good should not be played. That's that's nonsense.
That's kind of...
But it should be balanced. It shouldn't go against the flavor of the game or the whole point of the game, you know. It
should at least allow you an option that isn't mandatory for the current meta.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least keep the creativity aspect in the decks.
Yes, I agree.
Because that's what deck building is all about.
Yeah, deck building should be a huge part of this game, not just trying to assemble the cards to put together whatever the top strategy is right now. And
deck building or team building is an important part of a lot of different games, not just Magic or any other trading card game.
Yeah.
It's important in a lot of video games that I've played, even competitively, such as Pokemon, where you build a team out of the Pokemon you have, and you put moves on them, you battle other people, and see who does better.
Yeah, so diversity is key. And this is a game that has literally thousands of cards that have been created. And so when you have a narrow list of strategies that are viable for playing, that defeats the whole purpose.
Something's wrong.
Yeah, it defeats the whole purpose of the game for me. So yeah, narrow strategies are, I think, what makes the game a drag. And that's why a lot of these things wound up on our list. So that's it. That is our podcast for this.
That is our WMTG cards or mechanics that were too good to ever have been existed.
Never should have been made.
No.
And there will be more topics in the future.
Who knows? Maybe we will do the cards or mechanics that were so bad they shouldn't have existed.
Oh, I think that's definitely going to be.
That's going to be soon.
If not next, then we'll get around to it.
Stay tuned.
Sure. Yeah, stay tuned. Thank you for listening. Catch you next time.
See you later, guys.